Welcome to Sora Law, where we bring you the most perplexing and chilling true crime stories that remind us of the dark complexities hidden within human nature. In today's episode, we unravel a story that shook a small town in the United Kingdom to its core, a tale of deception, betrayal, and a community torn apart by lies. On May 20, 2020, during the height of the COVID-19 lockdown, a young woman named Eleanor James made a shocking post on social media that would send shockwaves across the country. She claimed to be the victim of a horrific trafficking ring, abused and tortured by a group of men who had been exploiting her for years. The graphic images she shared of her injuries ignited a firestorm of support, but as the truth began to unravel, it became clear that nothing was as it seemed. Join us as we dive into the disturbing case of Eleanor James, a story where the lines between victim and villain blur in the most unsettling way. On May 20, 2020, Eleanor James, a 20-year-old woman from Barrow-in-Furness, a coastal town in the UK, sat alone in her apartment, her hands trembling as she typed out a lengthy Facebook post. The country was in the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the streets were eerily quiet. As she hit share, she could never have anticipated the storm that would follow. Her post began with a haunting line, "This is the hardest thing I will ever write." Eleanor went on to describe years of unimaginable abuse. She claimed she had been groomed, raped, and trafficked by a group of men who had used her as their personal slave. She detailed how she had been taken to various locations, beaten, and left for dead multiple times. The post was accompanied by graphic photos of her injuries, bruises covering her body, her eyes swollen shut, and the word slut carved into her stomach. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the post had gone viral, attracting the attention of thousands of people. Support poured in from all corners of the country. Hashtags like #JusticeForEleanor trended on Twitter, and an online fundraising campaign raised thousands of pounds in just a few days. But the outpouring of support was quickly matched by an undercurrent of disbelief and skepticism, especially when, within an hour of her post going live, Eleanor was arrested by the police not as a victim, but as a suspect. The police had been familiar with Eleanor long before her Facebook post. Her first brush with the law came in 2017, when she was just 17 years old. At that time, Eleanor had reported being sexually assaulted at a house party, claiming that a young man named Cameron had drugged and raped her. She described waking up in a haze, receiving a series of taunting Snapchat messages from Cameron that read, "Drugged you, fucked you, laughed at you." Cameron was horrified when confronted by the police. He denied everything, insisting that Eleanor had been heavily intoxicated but unharmed when he left her at the party. After a thorough investigation, the police found no evidence to support Eleanor's claims, and Cameron was released. The case was closed, but it left a mark on the local community, a seed of doubt that would later bloom into something much darker. Over the next few years, Eleanor's life took a downward spiral. She moved out of her family home after a series of arguments with her mother and stepfather and began living on her own. It was during this period of isolation that Eleanor's behavior became increasingly erratic. She frequently contacted the police with new allegations, each more shocking than the last. In May 2019, Eleanor called the emergency services, claiming that she had been attacked by a man named Jordan Taylor, who she said had beaten and raped her multiple times. She showed the police disturbing messages from Jordan, where he allegedly bragged about the assault, saying, "You were asking for it. I should have filmed it." Jordan, too, denied the allegations, and the police found his alibi credible. He had been with another woman on the night in question, and there was no evidence linking him to the crime. Despite this, Jordan was arrested and held in custody for months, awaiting trial. As the investigation into Jordan's alleged crimes dragged on, Eleanor's accusations continued to pile up. She reported being abducted and assaulted by a group of men led by a local businessman named Muhammad Khan. According to Eleanor, Khan had been grooming her since she was a teenager, using her in a human trafficking ring that stretched across the UK and Europe. She claimed that Khan had even tried to sell her in Amsterdam for €25,000. The police took Eleanor's allegations seriously, especially given the troubling parallels to the infamous Rochdale and Rotherham grooming scandals that had rocked the UK in the previous decade. A special task force was assembled to investigate the claims, and Khan was arrested. But as the investigation progressed, cracks began to appear in Eleanor's story. As the police delved deeper into Eleanor's claims, they began to notice inconsistencies. For one, the locations and events she described didn't add up. She provided the police with detailed descriptions of houses and people she claimed to have encountered, but when officers visited these locations, nothing matched her account. More disturbingly, CCTV footage from the night of her alleged abduction showed Eleanor checking into a hotel in Blackpool alone, buying snacks from a local shop, and spending the night watching BBC iPlayer in her room far from the horrific ordeal she had described. The investigation took a turning point when police examined Eleanor's phone records and social media activity. What they found was shocking. Eleanor had been using multiple fake accounts to send herself threatening messages, which she then used as evidence against her supposed attackers. She had fabricated entire conversations, creating a complex web of lies to support her narrative. In one instance, she had changed the contact name of a boy she knew from school to Rami, and used this fake identity to accuse him of being a trafficker. The more the police uncovered, the more it became clear that Eleanor had meticulously crafted a story designed to elicit sympathy and outrage, all while casting herself as the central victim. Faced with mounting evidence of her deception, Eleanor was arrested in July 2019 and charged with perverting the course of justice. But even as the police prepared to take her into custody, Eleanor vanished once again, only to reappear hours later with fresh injuries, bruises, cuts, and a swollen face. She claimed to have been kidnapped and assaulted by yet another group of men, but the police were no longer inclined to believe her. A subsequent investigation revealed that these injuries, like the others, were self-inflicted. Eleanor's arrest sent shockwaves through the community of Barrow-in-Furness. The men she had accused, some of whom had spent months in jail awaiting trial, were released, but their lives had been irreparably damaged. Jordan, who had been accused of rape, spoke publicly about the toll the accusations had taken on his mental health, revealing that he had attempted suicide while in custody. Muhammad Khan, who had been dragged through the mud as the leader of a fictitious trafficking ring, described how his reputation had been destroyed, his business ruined, and his family subjected to threats and harassment. The community was left reeling, grappling with the knowledge that they had been deceived on such a grand scale. The social media outcry that had once supported Eleanor turned into a wave of backlash, with many demanding answers as to how such a situation could have been allowed to escalate. In October 2022, Eleanor stood trial for her crimes. The prosecution presented a damning case, laying out in painstaking detail how she had fabricated evidence, manipulated those around her, and ultimately caused untold harm to innocent people. Forensic experts testified that the injuries Eleanor had shown in her viral post were consistent with self-inflicted wounds, and digital evidence traced every false accusation back to her own devices. Eleanor's defense argued that she was suffering from severe mental health issues, pointing to a history of trauma and substance abuse. A forensic psychiatrist diagnosed her with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, citing childhood trauma as a possible cause for her behavior. However, the prosecution countered that while Eleanor's mental health may have played a role in her actions, it did not excuse the elaborate and malicious nature of her lies. After a 10-week trial, the jury deliberated for just 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Eleanor was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison, a sentence that was unusually severe given the nature of her crimes. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, noted the devastating impact Eleanor's actions had on her victims, as well as the wider damage done to public trust in the justice system. He acknowledged the challenges posed by Eleanor's mental health, but ultimately concluded that her actions were calculated and intentional. The fallout from Eleanor James's case was far-reaching. For the men she falsely accused, life would never be the same. Jordan Taylor and Muhammad Khan both struggled to rebuild their lives, their reputations forever tarnished by the accusations. Khan, in particular, spoke of the fear he still felt walking through his own neighborhood, where people continued to view him with suspicion despite his exoneration. The case also had a chilling effect on genuine victims of abuse and trafficking, many of whom expressed fear that their stories would not be believed in the wake of Eleanor's lies. Advocacy groups raised concerns about the long-term impact on public trust and the potential for real victims to be dismissed or discredited as a result. In the months following the trial, a public inquiry was launched to examine the handling of the case, focusing on the role of social media in amplifying false accusations and the responsibilities of law enforcement in verifying such claims. The inquiry led to calls for stricter regulations on the use of social media platforms for reporting crimes, as well as improved training for police officers in handling complex cases of alleged abuse. Eleanor's family, meanwhile, was left to grapple with the dual burden of their daughter's actions and the public scrutiny that followed. Her mother publicly expressed her disbelief at the verdict, maintaining that Eleanor had been a victim of her own mental illness and that the system had failed to provide her with the help she needed. Despite this stance, the court's decision remained firm. Anne's statements only deepened the divide between those who believed in Eleanor's innocence, citing her troubled history, and those who saw her as a calculated manipulator who had caused irreparable damage to others. The community of Barrow-in-Furness, once a close-knit town, was left fractured. Long-standing relationships were strained as people took sides, and the town's reputation suffered as the case continued to attract national attention. Local businesses, particularly those owned by members of the Asian community, faced boycotts and threats, as lingering suspicions and racism festered even after the truth had been revealed. The town that had once rallied together in support of Eleanor now found itself grappling with the fallout of her lies. As the dust began to settle, those affected by Eleanor's actions slowly started to rebuild their lives. Jordan Taylor, one of the men falsely accused, moved away from Barrow-in-Furness in an attempt to start fresh. The experience had left him deeply scarred, both mentally and emotionally. Despite being cleared of all charges, he found it difficult to shake off the stigma of the accusations. In a candid interview, Jordan revealed that he continued to struggle with trust and anxiety, fearing that people still viewed him as guilty despite the court's ruling. "You're never really free of it," he said. "People hear the accusations, and they don't always hear the truth afterward." Muhammad Khan, another victim of Eleanor's deceit, also faced significant challenges in the aftermath of the trial. His business, once thriving, was on the brink of collapse. The financial strain was compounded by the emotional toll the ordeal had taken on him and his family. "My children were threatened, my wife was afraid to leave the house," he recounted. "It's something you never forget. The damage was done, and no amount of truth can completely erase it." Community leaders in Barrow-in-Furness worked tirelessly to repair the rifts that had formed. They organized town meetings, public forums, and cultural events aimed at rebuilding trust and fostering understanding among residents. These efforts, though well-intentioned, were met with mixed results. While some in the community were eager to move forward and heal, others remained entrenched in their beliefs, unwilling to fully let go of the anger and suspicion that had been stirred up by Eleanor's lies. The case of Eleanor James had far-reaching implications beyond the borders of Barrow-in-Furness. Nationally, it sparked a debate about the role of social media in shaping public perception and the dangers of trial by public opinion. Legal experts, media commentators, and social justice advocates weighed in on the case, each bringing their perspectives on the lessons to be learned. One of the key issues that emerged was the challenge of balancing the need to believe and support victims of abuse with the importance of thoroughly investigating claims before taking action. Many pointed out that the rapid spread of Eleanor's story on social media, coupled with the emotionally charged nature of her allegations, had made it difficult for law enforcement and the public to take a measured approach. The case underscored the need for careful scrutiny in such cases, especially in an era where information and misinformation can go viral in a matter of minutes. In response to the case, several lawmakers began pushing for reforms aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. Proposals included stricter guidelines for reporting allegations of abuse online, enhanced training for police officers on handling complex cases involving mental health issues, and increased support for individuals accused of crimes that are later proven to be false. The impact on real victims of abuse and trafficking was another major concern. Advocacy groups expressed fears that Eleanor's case would lead to greater skepticism of victim stories, potentially discouraging them from coming forward. To combat this, these groups intensified their efforts to educate the public about the complexities of trauma and the importance of supporting survivors, while also emphasizing the need for thorough investigations. In the years following her conviction, Eleanor James remained a controversial figure. Her case became a touchstone for discussions about mental health, the justice system, and the power of social media. While in prison, Eleanor underwent extensive psychological evaluation and treatment. Her therapists reported that she continued to struggle with accepting responsibility for her actions, often reverting to a narrative in which she cast herself as a misunderstood victim. This resistance to acknowledging the harm she had caused was a significant barrier to her rehabilitation. Eleanor's family, particularly her mother Anne, continued to advocate for her release, arguing that her actions were the result of untreated mental illness rather than malicious intent. Anne's efforts included filing multiple appeals and seeking to raise awareness about the challenges faced by individuals with complex trauma. Despite these efforts, the courts upheld Eleanor's sentence, emphasizing the severity of her crimes and the extensive harm she had caused. As Eleanor's story gradually faded from the headlines, the town of Barrow-in-Furness slowly began to heal. The scars left by the case were deep, but over time, the community found ways to come together. Local businesses that had been targeted during the height of the scandal started to recover, with the help of initiatives aimed at supporting those affected by the fallout. Community leaders continued to focus on promoting unity and understanding, working to prevent such divisions from arising again. In the end, the case of Eleanor James served as a stark reminder of the complexities of truth and the destructive power of lies. It highlighted the importance of compassion and due process, the dangers of unchecked social media influence, and the need for continued vigilance in protecting the rights of both victims and the accused. The disturbing case of Eleanor James is a powerful example of how quickly our perceptions can be manipulated and how devastating the consequences of false accusations can be. It challenges us to think critically about the information we consume and to approach each story with a balance of empathy and skepticism. At Soralaw, we remain committed to exploring the stories that reveal the darkest aspects of human nature and the complex dynamics at play in the pursuit of justice. If you found this story compelling, we invite you to subscribe to our channel and join us as we continue to uncover the truths that often lie hidden in plain sight.